All right, Pouring Nation, today I'm going to answer the question that a lot of you guys have had over the last couple of weeks, and that is how to get cells with silicone. Silicone's a great way to get cells with acrylic pouring. There are a bunch of different techniques that work so well with silicone. However, silicone by itself is not going to make great cells. You have to have the right consistency of paint and use your heat sources, a heat gun or a torch, correctly to get those cells to work how you want them. So we're going to talk about the consistencies, the different kinds of silicone you want to use, some tips and tricks at the end to make sure that you have the best chance possible to get an amazing pour with your silicone. So first things first, I want to show you a couple of pours that I've done that have silicone in them. This first pour is something similar to what I'm trying to get now, where I have a bunch of different cells. I have some stuff that doesn't have any cells. The cells are generally circular in shape. They're not too misshapen because of my tilting, and I really love this look. Another is a traveling open cup. Both these next pours that you see, I did a traveling open cup. I had a little bit too much paint, so I didn't get any negative space, but it made beautiful paintings. And this was with a medium to heavy consistent, or a medium consistent paint. This last one here is a painting that I did where the paint was way too thin. And so I got big old cells. Cells just kept popping up, and then they misshapen or went oblong because the mixture was so thin. So these are just a couple of examples of beautiful pours that you can make with silicone by varying the consistency of your paint and how you apply your heat source. So first of all, silicone. There are lots of different types of silicone. This is the one I'm using now, is Spot On Precision Pouring Oil. This is actually the same as their treadmill silicone, 100% silicone. It's kind of a medium texture. There is some silicone it feels a bit thicker and some silicone that feels a lot thinner. This is the one I recommend. The reason why I like this is, one, it comes with these attachments. This is the one that comes normally. I don't like this one as much because it's hard to get single drips out. Even if you open it just a tiny bit, the drips are really big that come out of this. So I like the needle nose, where I can control how much paint comes out a whole lot better. And then they have this tip also, which is a little bit better than the other one, where I can control how much paint comes out, or how much silicone comes out, excuse me. Again, I like the needle because I can be more precise. I get a little bit less every time, but then I can put more drops or less drops, and it's a lot easier. Another type of silicone you can use is the liquid wrench. WD-40 is the same type of thing, where it has silicone in it. Now, this isn't 100% silicone because it has some alcohol and some propellant so that it can spray out. If you're going to use this is going to be a lot more liquid. This is going to be thicker. This is going to be thinner. You'll get smaller cells with this and a lot more of them. But what I recommend is to spray this in a cup and let it sit for a while, preferably outside because it has quite a heavy scent. And then once some of the alcohol has evaporated, then use that, maybe with a toothpick, to drop it in or something as your silicone. I will put a link to both of these products in the description below if you want to pick those up. This one also comes in a nice handy bottle, and it has a couple of the different attachments that it comes with. So I like that one. This I've barely used down to the label here. This will last me years. It doesn't go bad as long as you keep it in a place where it doesn't get too much moisture. So that's what I recommend. So the reason why we use silicone, if you've seen my video about the consistency of paint, I'll link it in the description above and down below. But the reason why silicone works to make cells is because when you have paint, I'm going to show you the paint that I'm going to use here. When you have paint sitting on your canvas and you have silicone in it, the silicone weighs less than the paint does. So what happens is the silicone is underneath the paint here. Let's say it's in the orange, and it travels up through the orange, through the gray, through the the tan, and it pulls pieces of those paint as it's traveling up. And then it comes to the top and just kind of opens up on top. That's why you get round cells if you just leave it by itself. As soon as you start tilting it, obviously you're going to move those around. But it's the density. Silicone is very light compared to paint, so it's always going to rise to the surface and create those cells. So the other big thing for cells is the consistency of paint. Now I normally, and in this example, I'm going to use paint that is on the thick side. Look how thick that is. Creates a mound upon a mound and then disappears. So I want it thicker because the thicker the paint is, the harder it is for that silicone to come up through. You're not going to get as many cells, and usually the silicone's going to combine with each other and make bigger cells as it comes up. If your paint is on the medium, where it creates a mound and goes away, or it doesn't create any mound at all, you're going to get way more cells and they're going to move around more. This is a painting I did the other day that had too thin of paint. See, it has a ton of cells, but they're all oblong and misshapen. Beautiful, but still, you just want to recognize what you want to get out of your pour. Another thing is, people say that the more you mix your paints, the smaller your cells will be, and the less you mix, the bigger they'll be. I don't believe that. Honestly, I think it matters how you apply your heat and how much silicone you put in, not how quickly or how little you mix your paints once the silicone is in there. I do recommend giving it a good mix or two before you put it in like a dirty pour cup, just to make sure that there's not just one big glob of paint. If there's a big glob of paint, or silicone, excuse me, it will create these caterpillar cells, which are beautiful. I mean, I really love this painting, but some people don't want that. So when the silicone sits all together and then kind of runs out slowly, the silicone sits on the side of a cup and then kind of runs out slowly, that's what creates these caterpillar cells. So what we're going to do here, we're going to do an example, and I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone in each of these. I recommend 1 drop of silicone per 2 ounces of paint. If you start out with that, figure out how it works, how you like it, then you can add more or less silicone depending on what you're doing. So I have my gray here, and I'm going to see how that comes out really tiny. 1, 2, and I'm doing 2 because these are really tiny drops, and this is about 2 ounces of paint. So those little tiny drops equal a normal drip that you'd get from a normal dropper. In this one, I don't want to let a cells out of this, so I'm just going to do 1. And look, in this one I'm going to do 2. And look how little silicone is in there. Look at those drops. It's a teeny tiny bit of silicone, but you'll see how amazing those can be. And I'm just going to do 1 in this. So I'm going to give those a good stir. Now while I'm doing that, if you have not been to my channel before, I experiment and have tutorials on how to acrylic paint pour. For a lot of it's for beginners, but I think a lot of this will actually help anyone doing acrylic paint pouring. And if that's to your liking and this video has been helpful so far, please paint that like button down below. And if you want to see my videos every week, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerted when those come out. Usually Saturday mornings and sometimes a bonus video during the week. All right, so now we're going to do an example painting. I have already painted my canvas. I almost always pre-paint my canvas or do a base layer of paint before doing a pour with silicone, because if you don't, the silicone can hit the canvas first, and then you get the canvas showing through on your painting instead of the paint. And as long as I have this painted or I have a base coat, then I'll get the base coat or the painted coat down here, and then I won't worry about this because it's already the right color and it will blend in just fine. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to do 2 dirty pour cups. Just going to put those in here. Start out with a little gray. So I'm going to stir this really quickly right before I pour it in my cup. Now this canvas is a 12 by 12, which is 144 square inches, which divide that by 25, and that gives you approximately how much paint you need. Now in this case, that would be 6 ounces of paint. Now in this case, I have thicker paint, so I probably need closer to 7 or 8, which is about what I'm going to have here with the paint that I've made up. Plus I've already painted the base, so I don't really have to worry about covering everything if I don't have to. Now this is the place you don't want to leave your paints too long if they have silicone in it. Otherwise the silicone's going to rise in your flip cup instead of on your painting. So we're just going to flip this over here, flip this over here, let that sit just for a second. Again, we have silicone. We want it to move through our paint. And then we're just going to flip and drag. And I like the lines in my painting, so I try and do that every time. So one thing that I recommend, if you want big cells that hold their shape, don't torch till you've tilted half of your paint off. The reason being is the sooner you torch, the quicker those cells form, and then the more the tilting is going to disfigure those cells and make them not as round and nice. So I'm just going to get this paint to connect with each other. Just going to kind of go back and forth. It's so thick that if I just went to one direction, this whole thing I would have lost. So I want to make sure that I'm saving as much as I can before it goes off the edge. I'm just going to let it go off a little bit there. So now that I've done that, now I want to take my heat sources. And either one of these works. I have a heat gun that I like. It gets hot, but it doesn't shoot a lot of air like a hairdryer would. And I want to stay really high up. Make sure it's plugged in. And really all I'm doing here is heating the surface of the paint to break the surface tension to allow the silicone to come through. The thicker the paint is, the longer this will take. You don't want to burn it or anything. So that is enough for now. I'm going to take my torch on this side. Now the torch is going to be more concentrated and hotter, so I don't want to get too close. You can see right here I got too close and I got a ton of little teeny tiny cells coming up. I don't know if I said it before, my pouring medium in this is 1 part glue, 1 part student level acrylic, and then water to consistency. And you can see here it's very thick. I should have probably had another ounce of paint on here. I didn't realize how much this would thicken up at the end here, but and as you notice, the cells are just starting to come out. They didn't come out really quickly and so they didn't get misshapen, but now I'm going to use my torch here. So while we're waiting for those cells to fully form now, I talked about the surface tension. What the surface tension is by default your paint wants to attract to itself. So a layer of paint, it's kind of attracting to itself like this. And it doesn't want to let anything break that layer of paint. And that's called the tension of that paint. And if I have silicone underneath that wants to come up, but I have more tension than the silicone has power to break through, it's just going to sit there. But when I heat the surface of the paint, what that does is it makes this a little bit more active. The atoms in that paint be a little bit more active, which allows it to kind of separate a little bit. And as it separates, then it doesn't have enough power to stick together, with breaking the surface tension, and that silicone can come up in between, or come up through that paint and show here. That's why thicker paints are going to give you more rounded cells. In this case, I was really thick, so I didn't get cells that are quite as big, but they're going to be circular and not a lot of, because they didn't really form till after I tilted, they're going to be more circular or oval shaped rather than get misshapen. But that's what I mean by breaking the surface tension. You just want to cut the power that paint has to hold together and let the less dense paint and the less dense silicone come up. So we're just going to leave this for a few minutes and check on it just a minute. All right, Pouring Nation, I know you guys like when I go over my pour at the end and just critique it. So here is a bunch of my beautiful cells. They're really small cells because, again, my paint was a little bit too thick. If I would have thinned it a little bit more, it would have been perfect. But I got a ton of cells, a ton of color definition, not a lot of colors muddying together. A couple of just regular cells also. But overall, I'm happy with this. If you've seen before, I've done this color palette before, and I actually really like it. If you're interested, here is another video about some of the mistakes that I made while acrylic pouring with silicone a few weeks ago.